but I'm really optimistic about 2025, and I'm just excited to see a different view of things instead of constantly being like, how do we maximize utilization? How do we maximize ABR? We're still going to do those things, but there's just less pressure around it and more benefit in the end, more profit.
Welcome to the Agency Profit Podcast, a show dedicated to going deep space on agency operations, which is just as nerdy as it sounds. I'm your host, Marcel Petitpoff. I'm the CEO of Parakeeto, a firm that helps digital and creative agencies measure and improve their profitability. Join me as I interview some of the smartest thought leaders and agency owners in our space and go deep into operations, metrics, and all the other things you need to get right so you can spend less time worrying about operations and more time executing on your vision. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Agency Profit Podcast. I'm fired up because I've alluded to it on the show a couple of times in the past. Like, we should do more of these episodes where it's like just me, or we're talking about our own ideas because we do that on other people's shows. And then I kind of did it every once in a while. But this quarter, the commitment got made. It's happening. It's official. The podcast is coming out weekly instead of bi-weekly. And every other week, it's going to be Parakeeto, talking about Parakeeto stuff. And you should care about that because we're going to be able to go very deep on profitability, the framework, the model, all of the things that you've probably heard me talk about on other shows. And part of this that I'm very excited about is you're going to get to know the team, the people that actually work with clients every day, because that's not me anymore. And to kick things off, we have the fan favorite, the person who is quickly building a fan club. We keep joking about this. It makes them very uncomfortable, but we're going to get t-shirts made. They say, I love Carson on them, and all of our clients are going to get them. His name is Carson Pierce. He has been our head consultant for 2.5 years, an incredible person. And I'm just very happy to have him on the show to introduce him to all of you. So with all of that, Carson, thank you for joining us on the show today, man.
Thanks, Marcel. It's nice to be here. I rarely get to talk to you. Every day.
Well, now we get to talk in a public forum. I'm really excited that we're doing this, and I've been looking forward to this episode in particular because we're going to talk about your incredible past working in the agency space for the better part of 2 decades, if not a little bit more, and some of the lessons that have been learned, and you know, so there's a lot to get into. But before we get into all of that, I think it'd be great to, in your own words, kind of describe where you came from. Who is Carson Pierce, and how did you get here?
Well, let me tell you about my mother. No, I went to school for business, and when I graduated, I'm like, I don't want to get an accounting job, a junior level accounting job. So I actually bought a daycare, which is not my field of expertise. But I wanted to run a business. So it enabled me to learn, marketing, finance, HR, everything. I got to do all of it right out of the gate. And it was great. I loved it. But I realized a couple of years into it, that wasn't my thing. And so it wasn't long after that I got right into agency life. So I've been doing this since pre-digital when I started. Actually, no. When I started as a programmer, and I distinctly remember in the interview showing the hiring guy some PHP stuff, and he had no clue because it was so brand new. And he's like, I don't know, it sounds like you know what you're talking about. You're hired. And then I would go to a meeting and we'd tell a client what we were going to do for them, and I'd be like, oh crap, I need to go learn this. So it was very early on in the digital days of agency, but that's kind of where I've been for the last 20 plus years. After a few years of development, I started my own agency. I, learned all the lessons you learned doing that, sold that agency. And when I sold my agency to another agency, I joined that one. And it was kind of a question of like, well, what do we do with you now? Who are you? And I moved into project management. So I've been doing project management for close to 20 years. And I loved it. I still love project management. I have a real soft spot for that. But I kind of got to a point in my career a few years ago where I thought I want to do more. I wanted to solve bigger problems. so moved into the ops side of things, and that was okay. But doing ops in one agency, you only get to see a certain amount of stuff, and you only get to solve a certain number of problems. So when I had an opportunity a few years ago to join Parakeeto, it's like, oh, this is like the dream job. Now I get to every week or two, I'm opening up a whole new set of books and problems, and getting to learn from tons of agencies. So I think in the last couple of years, it's been somewhere around 75 agencies that I've dug into the depths of, and I love it. So I love every day meeting with agency owners and ops people and solving problems.
So, just so everyone has a sense of kind of the breadth of experience that you've had, obviously a massive volume of getting into the weeds on agencies since you've been here at Parakeeto. But prior to that, you've kind of been in a whole bunch of different types of agencies, a lot of different disciplines, a lot of digital, though, I would say,
Mm.
and everything from really big to really small and a lot of stuff in between. So just so everyone has a picture of like the tapestry of that 20-year career across being a developer, a project manager, and into senior project management and then operations management, what kind of different agencies have you worked at?
Yeah. So the first agency I worked at, I think when I started there was probably like 5 or 6 of us, and I've had a few of those. I left that agency and started my own agency, and we grew to about that same size, 5 or 6. So definitely lots of experience on the small boutique style agency stuff. Mid-sized agencies, I've spent numbers of years at those where you've got, 20, 30, 40 people, which is a whole new set of problems. And then I've worked at like DDB, which is Omnicom now. So it's, hundreds, thousands. I don't know how many people they have, but big business agency stuff. And they all have very similar problems, and they all have different problems. But yeah, I've got to see a little bit of everything.
So, with all of that, you joined Parakeeto 2.5 years ago. It's been a wild ride. It's been a lot of fun. We've seen a lot of things. And, I think you've learned a lot. This is one of the things that I admired about you back then. And I still admire about you today is you are so hungry for learning. You love to learn. Despite the fact that you're learning so much on the job every day, you're still reading books in your free time. In fact, your daughter recently made fun of you by reading a book and saying, "Look, I'm being daddy." And so really clearly that mirror is being held up. So what are some of the things that some of the biggest lessons that you think you've learned, the big ideas that you've taken away from being here for 2.5 years?
Yeah. Oh man, it's. I don't even know where to start with it because it is so night and day from before I was at Parakeeto. So, like I said, I've worked at lots of agencies. I've seen lots of things. Almost universally, it felt like we were kind of flying blind in so many ways, including my own agency. With my agency, it was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I just know that I can sell some stuff and I can pay some people to do some stuff, and hopefully there's money left over. That was kind of the extent of how I was running it. Um, and then I went to another agency and took over their project management. And again, I was like, I don't know. This seems like the right way to do it. You're always working in this vacuum. So now, having been able to see how so many different agencies operate and the mistakes they're making and the things they're successful at, and being able to apply that, I look back at all those previous experiences, and it just is agonizing. I'm not one to like live in regret, but it is difficult to think back and go, oh, we could have done so many things differently, knowing what I know now. And most of it, I mean, Parakeeto is very much focused on data and understanding data and using data to make decisions. We always had the data, even like way back. We were still tracking our time and everything. We just had no idea what to do with it, and what it meant. And so that's the huge gap. Like if I could take some of those learnings around how to use data, and apply it back then, well, I probably wouldn't be here because those agencies would be wildly successful, and we rolling in money. So, alas.
Alas, here you are. So, I mean, this is the problem that we exist to solve at Parakeeto. agencies have more data than they've ever had. The cost of creating that data is almost zero. It's been for a while. Like, it's not hard to track time. It's not hard to have a QuickBooks set up. It's not hard to get project management set up. But to your point, having that actually impact decision making, be understood, and give people the clarity, the confidence, all of the things that lead to the right outcomes, that is much harder. But what I found, and I'm sure you found this as well, is putting your finger on exactly why, like what's missing. What is the gap between we have data and we have clarity and insight and decisions that we can all agree on and feel good about? That is a very fuzzy kind of black box.
Yeah.
And what I'm curious about is, what have you learned about bridging that gap? What are some of the big missing pieces that, had you had them back then, you think things would have been different?
Yeah. So one example that comes to mind is resourcing. I just remember going to all these PM conferences, and the PMs would get together like, what's your problem? And it almost always, it felt like resourcing was a huge one. No one knew how to do it effectively. And I've certainly been in that boat where I remember having weekly PM meetings at an agency, and we would just, get 5 PMs in a room, and we would just yell at each other and try to like split up people's time. I'm pretty mild mannered, but I remember like banging my hand on the table, like, let's figure this out. Everyone's shocked. It was so frustrating. And that's because we just didn't have the runway of the information. We kind of could look at our project and go, okay, I know what's going on for the next week or two. And that was kind of the extent of our view. So every week or two, we're fighting fires, trying to figure out what to do. And with the Parakeeto data that we've developed, we've created this structure around being able to see much further into the future. It's not granular, and it shouldn't be granular. Side story, I also worked with a guy who I remember he would spend hours every day updating this project plan and Gantt chart and everything. Hours every day, moving tasks around so that it was perfect to the end of the project, which was months and months away. And it was so dumb because as soon as he was done, something had changed and he would have to update it again. That's not where I want to go. I want to just be able to know, what do I need to be thinking about and planning for 2 months, 3 months from now, so that I'm not panicking when it lands on my desk and it's only a week away. So, and I mean, hiring, it takes time. If you're not seeing a problem with hiring months in the future, you're not going to have that person in time. And then you're scrambling and you're fighting other fires. So that was a huge one for me, was on the resourcing side, is just not living in panic mode all the time about what's going on. Well, it's either panic mode or you're not panicked, and it's just being done really poorly. So some people are busy, some people are not busy. You've got, just such inefficiency there.
I think what I love about this is it ties back to this kind of big idea that is all throughout our way of working with clients, and I think is our most important job as consultants, which is protecting clients and project managers that work with our clients from their incessant desire to add more precision to their reporting systems, which ironically is the reason that those reporting systems are never accurate. And it's such an important idea. And yet in practice, it's really, really hard to implement. And we see it every time we go through a setup or an implementation phase with a client, where it's like, no matter how much we coach this principle of like, our goal here is to simplify this and have less precision and to focus on the big picture and the big idea, there's always this pressure that we have to be very, very on top of the client wanting to add more detail, add more, nuance to the data. And to your point earlier, it's like the reason that often you were only able to see a week or two in advance with resourcing, for example, was because it's a reliability block diagram, right? If we are trying to build an insight up here out of 1,000 little building blocks that all have a 1% chance of being inaccurate at a given moment in time, there is a 1,000% chance that our insight at the top is not accurate. But it comes from this utopian and very naive pipe dream that I remember having earlier on in my career, and I'm sure that you had too, and most project managers listening to this would have, of everything from the top to the bottom, it's all connected, it all flows, right? Like every task ladders up to the milestone, which ladders up to the project, which ladders up to the finance. And it's like like that sounds nice in theory, but in practice, it's just completely unfeasible.
Yeah.
And it's deliberately going against that I think ends up leading to sustainable systems that serve the specific purposes that they're set out to serve.
Yeah. One of the most rewarding things, I think the feeling I got as a project manager was when you plan a project and you build out this Gantt chart and it's perfect. Like I've got everyone lined up, all the tasks are in the right spot. And you're like, that is amazing. I'm going to like hit send on this one. And it's so dumb because it never happens that way. But there is, especially project managers, and I've been there, there's this desire to get everything quote unquote pixel perfect, if I'm going to cross over into other industries. Where, we've got this data, the data's got, 3 decimal points. It's so precise. Everything should be perfect. And certainly when you're on the financial accounting side, that might be true. But for everything else, it's not anywhere close to true. And you're right, we have to let go of that desire to have everything just down to the penny, because that's not where the insights are. The insights are at a higher level than that. And I've struggled with it for sure, where I want to put in all these like perfect numbers. And you get so stuck in the weeds of digging around with, trying to get everything lined up that you don't step back and see like, oh, we've got this huge problem. Who cares if it's 0.1 or 0.3? We need to move the needle on this, and it's going to be, hundreds of times more effective than whatever it is, that minutia that we're trying to play around with.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's such a big idea, right? Is we see this with a lot of clients where they're so obsessed with this kind of like very incremental difference in precision when you ladder up to the question that's being answered, and it's so immaterial. Like that little bit of precision is so immaterial to the outcome. It's like the error bars around this not being the right thing to focus on are so massive because it's so obviously the problem that it doesn't matter if we're rounding things a little bit here. And it's a really challenging thing to do, to your point, if especially as a project manager, you're only ever exposed to a thin slice of this, and you're rewarded your whole career for being very precise within that very small defined box.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's a mindset shift that is very difficult, I think, to get past. Like to go, the number isn't perfect, but that's not what's important here. So yeah, it's like, I often say that the coaching calls I do are like therapy. And yeah, I think project managers need some kind of like PM therapy to get past some of this stuff.
Yeah. You have permission. Yes. You are not your data.
Yeah.
It could get weird. Okay. So we've talked about precision versus accuracy, how that relates to resource planning. So that's a big idea. Anything else you want to share on that before we move on to your next big lessons?
Yeah, no, I think it's just, I think we've covered that off pretty well. It's just such a difficult thing to get past. One other thought on it though is, I remember I had a previous boss where I would give him all this information and I thought I was doing a great job, but really the information I was giving him was how to solve problems for the next week or two. Because I was very good at fighting fires, and if it was something that was hot and important, I could deal with it. But his comment to me multiple times was, I want you to see around corners. And I wasn't able to see around corners because I was so focused on getting this nice, perfect data in the short term. If I had been able to step back, see a higher picture, I would have been able to be more effective in helping him with that.
Do you want some free resources to help you measure and improve your profitability? If you do, then I want to tell you about our agency profitability toolkit, which you can grab absolutely free in the show notes or by heading to parakeeto.com/toolkit. It's packed with training videos, cheat sheets, templates, and all kinds of other great resources to help you start measuring and improving the essential metrics that are going to drive better profitability in your business. And it's helped thousands of other agencies around the world do the same. So I want to encourage you to go and grab a copy of that. And if you'd rather get in the fast lane and just have our team of experts guide you through the process of measuring and improving your profitability, then I want to encourage you to apply for a consultation at parakeeto.com. With that, I want to thank you again for tuning in. I hope you enjoy the episode, and I'll let you get back to it. So speaking of stepping back and seeing the higher picture, I think that kind of leads to this other insight about the framework. So maybe talk a little bit about how the model, the framework, however you want to articulate that, well, what's been impactful about seeing that in practice?
Yeah, I think it kind of goes back again to this whole idea of knowing what to do with data, but the model, like understanding how a normal, uh, like a sustainable agency is operating. There's real clear patterns on what that should be set up like. But if you don't know what that is, you're just kind of guessing, like, how much should we spend on sales and marketing? I don't know. This feels right. And there's so many different aspects of that. Once you understand the model and how it should work and how yours matches or doesn't match it, then you can start to make better decisions. But I've been in so many agencies where we didn't know that. We were, again, operating in a vacuum and just sort of guessing at things. And I remember one particular situation where I'd be on these leadership team meetings, and we would come in and someone would our ops guy would give a report, how things are doing. He would put up all the exact numbers, nice spreadsheet. And we would come in one week and it would be, things are going great. Maybe we need to slow down sales because we don't want to overload the team, or maybe we need to hire, whatever. He'd have all these recommendations. And then the next week we would come back in and it would be the exact opposite. All of a sudden we're in panic mode. We need to sell more work. We need to let people go or something. And I remember sitting there thinking, what is going on? And it's because we didn't have that underlying understanding of, what does all this mean? How does it fit together? And what do we do with it?
It's funny how often we see that, right? Like people that are 80% of the way there, they're producing the data we talked about earlier. That's the easy part. They're even measuring some metrics. But then it's like the details. It's like, okay, you're measuring utilization, but how exactly are you measuring that? And how does that correspond to the way you measure all these other metrics that you're reporting on next to utilization? And does everybody agree on that definition? And does everybody understand what it means for that number to go up or go down, and why it goes up and why it goes down, and the relationship that has with other things? And it's like, these are the nuances that are actually really quite elusive and have the biggest impact on whether that information is going to lead to good outcomes or bad outcomes. And it reminds me of something that Ben, my co-founder and our colleague here at Parakeeto, one of his Benisms, a very wise sentence, which is, bad data is worse than no data.
Yeah.
And I think this could be the reason why, right? You're creating you're making decisions and creating emotions around things that are not real, and often applying a false sense of certainty to them. And that is pretty dangerous.
Oh yeah. And we've seen it so many times where, yeah, people are calculating things in a certain way. They make decisions based on that. And we look at it and go, whoa, this is completely the wrong way of looking at this. And if you had known, you would have made a very different decision. And I think utilization is a great example of that. Like, if you don't measure utilization properly, it's so easy to get into all kinds of other problems, or even things like, I was just looking at one where we had a situation where average billable rate was really low, and utilization was really high. And we're trying to interpret that, and it's like, well, does this person have enough work? Because if they don't have enough work and they're just dumping a whole bunch of hours into this project, but you're not getting paid more for it, like, yes, he looks like he's the all-star of your team, but he's actually, not being very profitable. And just understanding some of those underlying fundamental calculations is so critical to knowing what the right decisions are.
I think part of it too is understanding the incentives around this, right? And I think you shared a story about in a previous agency utilization being used in a management context in a way that wasn't productive with the team. And I mean, we see this all the time, right? A firm that is really focused on utilization. And so the incentive in the agency becomes no matter how much work you actually have to do, put as many hours as you possibly
Oh
can
yeah.
into the time tracking tool against all the projects, no matter, whether that's necessary or not. And if you think about that, that's a really bad outcome. We
Hmm.
now don't actually know how long it takes to do things. The clients have a level of service maybe that is not realistic that they're now getting used to. The team feels as though they are busier than they actually are. The management team now thinks the team is busier than they actually are. Like
Yep.
we're poisoning the well, but it's
Yeah.
because we have to understand that, like, well, if we are holding the team accountable to a metric like utilization, that is the incentive that it creates. It pushes them to create that behavior. And I forget who had this quote, but something to the effect of show me the incentives and I'll show you the outcomes.
Hmm.
And, we see it all the time with our clients where inadvertently they like read a blog post somewhere or listened to a podcast that's not as good as ours and heard, oh, you should be focused on utilization. And they try it and they're like, oh shit, that didn't go the way I thought it was going to go. And there's a lot of nuance again to creating some balance in how not only you report on these metrics, but how you actually use them in conversation.
Yeah. I mean, utilization is really important, and we can make a big impact on our company, but it's not at the individual level. And the story you're talking about I mean, I was part of it. I was on the receiving side of being in these meetings, and we would literally sit around a table and they would pull up on the screen everyone's utilization numbers from the previous week or month or whatever it was. And it sucked so bad to sit there and go, hey, why are you only 40% utilized? And I'm like, well, that's how much work I have. And literally the feeling I left with was, I guess I'll just put in twice as many hours onto these projects, which of course, like you said, solves nothing. But yeah, it's such a crappy feeling. Utilization used properly, great. That's the right thing. But we need to figure out, and it's not the right thing for individuals, and we need to figure out what data, what information they need to make sense of everything. We need, as owners and operators, we need that information, but we also need to figure out how do we use it for the rest of the team too.
Um, is there anything else now? We're kind of coming up on time. Is there anything else that you have seen or learned in your time here, looking at 75 plus agencies, that has been surprising to you?
Yeah, tons of stuff. um, yeah, just off the top of my head, one thing that's been interesting is how unique each agency is. Like every time I look at a new agency's information, it feels like, oh, here's something totally different that haven't seen before, or at least not quite to that extent. But at the same time, so many things are the same. Um, so there's always those nuances, but there's some really fundamental issues that almost every agency is facing that we can go in and help with. So I love it because I love the variety, but I also love being able to extract information from previous experience and helping apply it to the new ones. That's been a huge one. Estimating is another interesting one where so many agencies like, okay, how did you come up with your price for your retainer, your hourly amount, whatever? And so often we just looked around and saw what other people were charging. We charge that much. And so when I hear that, I immediately go, oh, that sounds terrible. This is going to be a disaster. And then the surprising part is I'll run the numbers and go, actually, you know what? That price is not bad for what you think it is. Um, the problem is what they think it is not always what it really is. So it's like, hey, that price, 20 hours of effort, great. Everything looks, for the scope of it, the price is right. And then they actually do the work and it's not that at all. So then there becomes a whole problem around scoping, estimating in terms of effort or maybe it's execution, but somewhere there's a gap between what was planned and what really happened. And a lot of the times it's not even the team executing that it's the problem. It's like back in the sales process. And I've worked at a place where this was definitely the problem. It's like, oh, that price looks too high. We want to sell this project, so we're just going to reduce the price. Um, and then everyone gets upset because we went over budget at the end. So, but yeah, the surprising part is people are pretty good at planning a profitable project on paper, and then it's the reality of what happens that throws things off.
There's two things with that I think are really important to call out. The first is that, at least in my experience, I have felt that the ecosystem of information that agencies are exposed to make pricing out to primary problem that most agencies are dealing with and the primary solution to their profitability problems. And I think what we've seen is that it's very rarely actually the issue in an agency. Of course, the thing with pricing increases is that it can help. Like if you can increase your price, even if you have a utilization problem, even if you have an overservicing problem, even if you have, maybe average cost per hours that are like higher than they need to be, if you have overhead, like pricing can temporarily correct for a lot of those things because it will create margin. But for firms that have already kind of gone down that path and hit a ceiling, then they start to feel like, well, I don't have any other options. And in a lot of cases, as we've seen, that wasn't actually even really the problem. The problem was something else, and increasing the price masqueraded that. And so there's this dichotomy between, I think, what a lot of people come in believing, which is, oh, we don't charge enough. And so often we come to the conclusion of like, well, actually, you probably are charging enough if these other things about the business are true. And those are more usually about efficiency, about resourcing, about having the right balance of capacity.
Yeah.
And that is quite eye-opening to me, that like there's such a discrepancy between what we hear from other experts in the field. I'm going to be a douchebag about this and use air quotes. So if you're watching this on video, I'm saying experts with my little fingers, my bunny ears, versus what the reality is mathematically, which is like that's pricing is actually not a problem, even when people arrive at it in this kind of weird way. And then the
Yeah.
other thing that's interesting about that is the example that you just shared, right? Which is like, oh, the sales team lowers the price, and then the team's upset that they went over budget. And the fundamental issue there being the model by which agencies arrive at a price still today is often this function of we estimate hours and then we multiply hours by a rate. And and there is an intrinsic link between those things. And the rule is we never change the rate. And so if we want to lower the price, what we do is we pretend that the hours are going to be fewer than they actually will.
Yeah.
And what's interesting about that is the result of changing the price or changing the hours is the same to the client and it's the same to the budget. The difference is lowering the hours when we weren't actually lowering the hours is just less clear.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like the worst possible way to lower the price. And it is really interesting to me to go into agencies and just like see how the mental models and frameworks that they use for pricing, for measuring finance metrics, for measuring operations metrics, for measuring project management metrics are often completely disjointed, completely independent of each other, and all kind of telling a very different story about the same thing. And I think this is what leads to this sense of kind of dread and overwhelm and confusion and tension and the lack of alignment and like all the things that we see end up actually holding people back.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. As you were talking, I was also just thinking about like we do a model exercise with agencies where we're like, show us on paper how your agency operates, how much you charge, how much your people cost, and so on. And most of the time, when we do that exercise, like you've got a good business here. Every once in a while, there's an exception, but most of them are like, this is a very profitable model. But it's the how do we execute on that is where it becomes the problem, and it's those underlying delivery issues that is where everything lies. Like we always know it's going to be a utilization problem. It's going to be an average billable rate problem. Like where those problems are coming from, what the source is a different question. But almost always we can dig in and figure out what's going on. But it's usually not that they've built out a model of a company that just isn't effective.
I'm glad you brought that up as well, because I think that's also somewhat indicative of like a discrepancy between the narrative in the industry and what we experience, which is, I think I see a lot of content, at least in my news feed and from, again, experts basically saying like, oh, this business model just doesn't work. It's fundamentally flawed.
Mm,
Or, they'll reduce it to like, oh, well, selling time is fundamentally
yeah.
flawed and doesn't work. And you can't be successful doing that. Or like, you can't be successful running an agency. You should abandon your business model. Your business model is the problem. And we often hear that from clients where they start working with us and they've become distracted trying to sell courses and trying to build software and trying to like
Mm,
build an escape pod to this business model that they believe is like fundamentally flawed, and that's the problem. And again, so often what we realize is this business model can and should be extremely profitable. There are just execution challenges that, if corrected, even if partially corrected, this thing accomplishes all of the founders' goals. And what they thought was a fundamental issue is actually much more solvable than they thought. But that clarity wasn't there because, they didn't have a framework to arrive at those conclusions through. And so,
yeah.
um, yeah, I think that's just been really interesting to watch over the years.
Yeah, I mean, looking at 75-ish agencies right now, like I said, they're all unique. And that's the interesting thing is everyone can sort of run their agency their way. That's the fun part about it is you get to figure out what kind of agency you want to run. And most of the time it will work. It's that and the execution problems are the ones that are universal to everyone. So you can have 75 different models, but really there's going to be 3 or 4 different types of problems that are going to stop you from that model being effective. And I love going in and figuring out, okay, what is it for you? Where are your big gaps right now? Because then you can start to get into problem solving mode.
Well, I know we're getting to time here, Carson, and you have places to be and things to do. So before we wrap up, last question here is, what are you most excited about going forward?
So last 2.5 years, well, certainly the last year and a half at Parakeeto, we as an industry have had a bit of a rough time. Like there just hasn't been the pipeline stability that we wanted to see, and it's taking a while to get back to where we want it to be. So I've gotten used to working in that mode with agencies. Like, yes, things are tight. We need to be really, really efficient about things. And maybe that's the best way I could have learned this job, because I really think that as we move into 2025, I'm very hopeful that that will change. Things are going to like start to come back to the way that they were. And all those lessons, the agencies that we're working with, at least, all the lessons that they've learned in these lean times, being efficient and being effective, just means that they're going to be head and shoulders above everyone else as we move forward. So I'm really excited about sort of turning the corner. I know you and I are planning on talking about what does 2024 look like? What is 2025 going to look like? But I'm really optimistic about 2025, and I'm just excited to see a different view of things instead of constantly being like, okay, how do we maximize utilization? How do we maximize ABR? We're still going to do those things, but there's just like less pressure around it, and more benefit in the end, more profit.
Yeah, more profit, more optionality, more
Yeah.
conversations about where are we going to invest. How do we use this profit to
Yeah.
accomplish the goals and the objectives that the business has. So I think that's an astute observation. I really do hope that 2025 is an easier year on agencies than 23 certainly, and also 24 has been, because it's been a rough couple of years
Yeah.
for a lot of our clients and a lot of the people that we're talking to out there. So with that, Carson, if people want to work with you directly, what should they do next? Where can they go to connect with you?
Well, there's a really, really well-run company called Parakeeto. Great leadership. Yeah. If you're listening to this, you already have all the information. Yeah, come chat with us.
That is the correct answer. But also, I think we'll put your LinkedIn
Sure.
in the show notes. So I encourage everyone to reach out to Carson and inundate him with messages so that he is distracted and doesn't have time to do his work. I'm just kidding. No, but he's very friendly. So please connect with him and reach out. And with that, Carson, thank you for being on the show. I'm looking forward to doing many more of these in the future. And if you are listening at home or in the car or at the gym or wherever you are, and you got something from this, then leave us a comment, send us a message, let us know what you thought of today's episode. And we'd love to hear from you. So with that, Carson, thanks again for making the time.
All right. Thanks.
Hey, thanks so much for tuning in to today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you've ever found yourself thinking, man, I get so much value from this podcast, I wish there was something I could do to return the favor. Well, today's your lucky day because you can leave us a review wherever you're listening to this, and it is incredibly helpful. Of course, if you haven't grabbed a free copy of the Agency Profit Toolkit, go and get that. It's got tons of free resources to help you improve your profitability. If you're looking to get in the fast lane and get help from experts to improve your profitability and measure your most important metrics, then apply for a consultation at parakeeto.com. We'd love to chat with you and figure out how we can help. With all of that, thank you so much for being a listener, and we will see you on the next episode.